Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we dive into the journey of Emily Carter, a woman who has fought against the odds to build a legacy of her own. From betrayal and heartbreak to reclaiming her rightful place at the helm of a multi-million-dollar company, Emily's story is one of resilience, empowerment, and triumph. As she moves from the shadows into the spotlight, she teaches us that true strength comes from within. Stay tuned as we explore how Emily takes control of her life, proving that success isn't just about what others see, it's about what you believe in. Don't forget to subscribe to begin today's story. The sun was high, casting its warm golden glow over the bustling streets of New York City. Emily pedaled her bicycle along the familiar path she had taken countless times. Yet today felt different. The roads, once filled with carefree joy and memories of love, now carried a heavier weight. Every turn, every glance reminded her of what had been, of a love lost and a betrayal that cut deeper than anything she had ever known. But today, Emily wasn't dwelling on the past. Today, she was determined to keep moving forward. She had learned over the years that no matter how hard life pushed her down, she could always rise again. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a blouse, her hair blowing gently in the wind, the smell of the city's energy mixing with the fresh air as she continued her ride. The faces of passers-by caught her attention briefly, but she paid no mind. Emily had grown accustomed to the curious stares of strangers. Some whispered, some simply looked, but she didn't care. She felt the freedom of the ride in her body and the wind against her skin, a feeling that made her feel alive, even when the world seemed intent on reminding her of her past. As she approached the intersection, she turned onto the main street leading to her apartment. When a sleek black car pulled up beside her, the engine hummed softly, and the tinted windows made it impossible to see who was inside at first. But then, a burst of laughter cut through the air, high-pitched, condescending laughter that made Emily's grip on the handlebars tighten. She slowed as the red light held them both in place, her heart picking up pace. Emily turned her head just slightly, trying to ignore the sudden rush of emotions threatening to surface. And there they were. Blake, her ex-boyfriend, the man who once promised her the world, and Savannah, the woman he had left her for. Blake sat back behind the wheel of a luxury car that she knew cost more than her entire savings. And Savannah was sitting beside him, her manicured fingers brushing against his chest as she looked at Emily with a smirk. Well, look who we have here," Savannah drawled, her voice dripping with mockery. "I didn't know they still made bicycles for adults." She tossed her head back, her laugh ringing in Emily's ears like a sharp, painful reminder of her past. Blake just grinned, tapping the steering wheel with amusement, as if he found her struggle some kind of joke. "You're still struggling, huh?" Blake mused, shaking his head. "You never did like the finer things in life. Maybe if you had aimed a little higher, you wouldn't be pedaling around like a delivery girl." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, but Emily refused to let them see her pain. She held her breath, swallowing the tears that threatened to rise. She wasn't going to let them win. She wasn't going to let their judgment define her. With a steady voice, she forced a small smile and replied, "I prefer staying active." It wasn't much, but it was enough. Savannah wasn't finished, though. "Oh, Blake definitely upgraded," she sneered, her eyes scanning Emily's modest attire as if it were something to be embarrassed by. "Look at me," she gestured, "and then look at that." She motioned towards Emily's bicycle, the very symbol of everything Blake had once turned away from. The light turned green, and Blake smirked one last time before they drove off, their laughter echoing in the distance. Emily stood still, motionless at the intersection, gripping the handlebars so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her chest tightened with a mixture of anger and sorrow, but not a single tear fell. If only they knew, she thought, her jaw tightening. If only they knew who I really was. The encounter had stirred up everything she had worked so hard to bury, the memories of the nights spent helping Blake prepare for job interviews, the days when she'd skipped meals to make sure they could afford rent, the quiet moments when they had dreamed together of a life they would build side by side. But all of it had been torn apart when Blake got his first real break. Emily had watched as he slowly changed, became distant, his calls fewer, his touch colder, and then, one evening, Blake had come home with that apologetic smile. His suitcase by the door. "Emily," he had said, his voice soft, falsely gentle, "I think we should take a break." She had stood frozen, unsure if she had heard him right. But the truth hit her fast. It wasn't a break. It was the end. Blake had already moved on to Savannah, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "You're too comfortable in the struggle," he had told her. "I want more. I want luxury, status. Someone who doesn't make me feel like I'm still clawing my way up." He didn't say it with anger. He said it with a kind of cold indifference. As if it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Megan wasn't enough. Not anymore. She wasn't enough for someone who had tasted success. Someone who had started to believe that status was all that mattered. And in that moment, Emily's heart broke. But she didn't let him see it. Instead, she swallowed her pain, nodded once, and said, "I hope she's worth it." Now, standing alone in her small, yet cozy apartment, Emily felt the weight of the past settle on her chest. The encounter had reopened wounds she had spent years trying to close. But the sting of it, though deep, was different this time. This time, Emily wasn't going to allow the hurt to control her. She was ready to move forward. Ready to show Blake, Savannah, and the world what she was capable of. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that behind the simple life she had chosen, Emily was quietly building something far bigger. Something that would one day make them all realize who they had underestimated. After that moment in the street, everything felt different for Emily. It wasn't just the mockery from Blake and Savannah that stung. It was the weight of her past. The years spent believing that she wasn't enough. That the simple life she led was somehow inferior. It was painful, yes. But the hurt wasn't the real issue anymore. It was the truth that had taken root inside her. She had been enough all along. Back in her small, yet perfectly kept office, Emily leaned against the desk, her fingers lightly tapping on the smooth surface of the glass table. The moment of revelation from earlier that day lingered. She knew what had to be done. She knew it wasn't about revenge, but about reclaiming her birthright, her power. Emily didn't just want to prove herself to Blake or Savannah. No, this was bigger than that. This was about restoring the legacy her mother had once built, one that had been unfairly stolen from her. It was time to make her presence known. And the world would soon learn who Emily Carter really was. For years, Emily had stayed in the shadows, watching as the public face of Lux Motors. Her company was Jeff, her childhood friend and trusted confidant. Jeff was the face everyone recognized, the one who made the deals and signed the papers. But Emily was the mastermind, the one who ran the show from behind closed doors. Every business decision, every step forward in their rapid expansion, had her fingerprints all over it. The designs, the innovations, the sacrifices, they were hers. But even in her success, Emily had remained invisible, preferring to stay low profile. The world was full of stories about powerful women who were undermined or, worse, destroyed by their own success. Emily had seen it all. She wasn't blind to the dangers of being a woman in a male-dominated industry. And so she'd kept her true identity a secret. But now, Emily was done hiding. "I think it's time we shake things up," she said, turning to Jeff as he sat across from her. The words felt liberating. Jeff raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He had always known that Emily's time in the shadows would come to an end one day. Though he had never imagined it would be this soon. "You mean you're ready to step forward?" he asked cautiously. Emily nodded with a smile that held both power and grace. "On my terms," she said firmly. "I'm going to claim what's mine." She could sense the admiration in Jeff's eyes. He knew the road ahead would be full of challenges. But he also knew Emily had the grit and the brains to take whatever came her way. "I always knew this day would come," Jeff said, leaning back in his chair. "The world isn't ready for Emily Carter." She smirked. "They'll have to be." The decision was made. Emily wasn't just going to sit back and let things unfold any longer. She was going to take control of Lux Motors. Her name would be attached to the company's legacy. But she would do it carefully. Slowly. With precision. She knew that the world needed to know who she was. Just not yet. Emily wasn't looking for applause. She wasn't interested in the quick thrill of fame or recognition. No. Her plan was to make her moves so subtly, so skillfully, that when the world finally learned the truth, the impact would be undeniable. Jason, another trusted ally, sat beside her, arms crossed. His gaze was intense as he studied her. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice steady. "You want to reveal your identity. But not yet. You want to destroy Blake. But not out of revenge. And you want the world to know you built Lux Motors. But only when it benefits you the most?" Emily smiled, a wicked gleam in her eyes. "Exactly." Jason exhaled sharply, shaking his head with a mix of admiration and concern. "You're a dangerous woman, Emily." She laughed lightly. "You've known that for years." Jason's expression shifted. He wasn't concerned about her ambition. No, he knew she had it in spades. What worried him was the emotional toll this could take. He had seen her broken before. Devastated by Blake's departure. The old Emily had been vulnerable, hesitant, and unsure of herself. But this was different. This was a woman who had learned the hard way that the world wasn't always fair. She had learned how to fight for what was hers. "I'm not doing it for Blake," she said quietly, her fingers tracing a prototype of the latest car design on her desk. "It's about respect. People like him think wealth is about showing off. I want to prove that real power is silent. It's earned, not flaunted." Jason studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Let's do this the right way. If you're stepping into the spotlight, you need a plan." Emily's lips curved into a small smile. "And I've got one." She leaned back in her chair, her mind racing with the possibilities. "The time for waiting is over. It's time to claim what's mine." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of quiet preparations. Emily worked diligently behind the scenes, making moves that would slowly but surely secure her position at the helm of Lux Motors. The company that had been founded by her mother, taken from her, and then handed over to Jeff, was now ready to be fully restored to its rightful place. She was no longer going to be the woman hiding in the shadows. Every decision Emily made had purpose. Every investment, every partnership, every acquisition was calculated. She wasn't just rebuilding Lux Motors, she was preparing for the moment when the world would see her for who she truly was. She had made sure that every piece of her plan was falling into place. And there was one last thing she needed to do: make a grand entrance. The opportunity came in the form of an industry gala. Lux Motors was hosting the event, and the company was expanding rapidly. It was the perfect platform to reveal Emily as the new face of Lux Motors. Not just the silent force behind it. The night was a celebration of success, of triumph, of the future of luxury cars. But for Emily, it was about something far deeper, something personal. The gala was held at a lavish venue in Los Angeles. A grand ballroom that gleamed with gold and crystal. It was filled with the wealthiest, most powerful names in the automobile business. Emily had been planning this moment for months, ensuring everything was in place for her debut. She was ready, and as the time approached for the big reveal, she stood off to the side, watching as the guests mingled, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. Blake and Savannah arrived, looking every bit the picture-perfect couple. Blake, with his smug, confident smile, and Savannah, hanging on his arm, her eyes scanning the room with excitement. Emily observed them from across the room, the irony of it all not lost on her. Blake had once been the center of her world, and now, he was just another person in the crowd, clueless about the power shift that had already occurred. As the host took the stage, whispers began to spread throughout the room. People were buzzing with curiosity about the elusive CEO of Lux Motors. Emily's name had been spoken only in hushed tones up until now. No one had seen her face. They had heard of the company's incredible rise. But the leader? She remained a mystery. The host smiled broadly as he took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. "Tonight, you will finally meet the brilliant mind behind Lux Motors. The leader who has revolutionized the industry and remains a force to be reckoned with." Blake leaned forward, eager, his curiosity piqued. He had no idea who this person was. None of them did. But he thought, perhaps, he could secure a deal tonight that would restore his position. What he didn't know was that the one person he had discarded, the woman he had mocked, was about to take the stage. The host turned to the side and extended his hand. Please welcome the CEO of Lux Motors, Emily Carter. The silence that followed was deafening. Blake's face drained of color. His body frozen in place. He blinked rapidly, struggling to process what was happening. Savannah's hand slipped from his arm as realization struck her. Emily was not just a woman from his past. She was the woman who had built this empire. And now she was standing in front of them as the embodiment of power. Emily walked onto the stage with a sense of quiet authority. Her every step deliberate, her presence commanding the room. The applause was immediate, but for Blake, it felt like a tidal wave crashing over him. The woman he had left for someone he thought was better. The woman he had mocked and discarded. Had just stepped into the spotlight, only it wasn't her humility that shone through. It was her strength, her vision, and everything he had been too blind to see. As she delivered her speech, Emily's gaze briefly met Blake's. For just a moment, she saw the recognition in his eyes, the exact moment he understood that he had lost everything. Ignoring him, Emily turned her attention to the crowd, thanking her team and emphasizing her vision for the future of Lux Motors. She spoke of the challenges, the long nights, and the sacrifices that had brought them to this point. All the while, Blake sat frozen in his seat, unable to move, unable to breathe, as the humiliation of everything he had once held dear sank in. Savannah, quick to recover from the shock, straightened her dress and whispered urgently to Blake. You have history with her. You can fix this. Go talk to her now. But Blake knew it was too late. There was no fixing this. He had underestimated Emily, and now he was paying the price. Emily finished her speech, the applause still ringing in her ears. As she made her way through the crowd, she stopped in front of Blake. A slow, deliberate smirk crept onto her face as she looked down at him. You laughed at me once, she said softly, her voice laced with quiet triumph. I wonder who's laughing now. And with that, she walked away, leaving Blake sitting in the wreckage of his own arrogance. His grip on his glass tightened as he watched her glide effortlessly through the room, exchanging smiles with the people who now sought her approval. The realization hit him like a wave. He had been nothing but a fool. The weeks following the gala were a blur for Emily. She had taken the stage, revealed herself as the true force behind Lux Motors, and in that single moment, the world had shifted. Her quiet resolve had paid off. But while the applause and admiration from the industry were gratifying, they did not define her victory. No, Emily's triumph was not just in the business world, it was personal. It was about reclaiming the life and the legacy that had been stolen from her and proving to herself that she had always been enough. She spent those weeks finalizing deals, expanding the company even further. But there was a different kind of fulfillment now. Emily no longer had to hide. The company that had once been her mother's dream, then her father's pride, and finally her own ambition, had now become something much more. It was her legacy. It was the result of years of struggle, sacrifice, and quiet persistence. It was more than just a business. It was the proof that she could overcome anything. But there was still something gnawing at her. Something unspoken. Despite everything she had achieved, there was still a weight that pressed down on her, an unaddressed chapter of her life. Blake, the man who had once been her world, who had abandoned her for Savannah, and who now, ironically, found himself in the ruins of his own arrogance. He had tried to salvage his own reputation by aligning himself with Lux Motors. But in doing so, he had unknowingly handed over control to Emily. She could feel the satisfaction of seeing him humbled. But at the same time, there was a strange emptiness. Blake had been the one to leave. He had been the one to turn his back on her. Yet there was a part of her that couldn't simply erase the pain of his betrayal. The woman she had once been, so eager to prove her worth, hadn't completely disappeared. One day, while reviewing reports in her private office, Emily's phone buzzed. The notification was from Blake. Emily glanced at it, then turned the screen face down. She didn't need to open it. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need any of it. The truth was, she had already found closure within herself. Blake's departure had been painful, but it had ultimately led her to this moment. It had shaped her into the woman she was today. And today, She was more than capable of letting go. She took a deep breath and looked out the window at the city skyline. The noise of the world felt distant, almost surreal. Lux Motors was expanding globally. A beacon of excellence. She had proved herself. But there was more, there was peace. I'm done looking back, she whispered to herself. Her focus shifted to Jason, who had entered the room silently. He had always been by her side, her confidant, her partner in business, and now, someone who seemed to embody the kind of stability she hadn't even known she craved. As she looked at him, a realization washed over her. For all the battles she had fought, for all the mountains she had climbed, there was one thing she had never fully allowed herself to embrace: love. Jason sat down beside her, a soft smile on his face as he placed a cup of coffee in front of her. He could see it in her eyes, the uncertainty, the unspoken thoughts. He didn't push her to speak. He just waited, patient, understanding. Emily had always been the one to lead, to take charge, to fix things. But now, for the first time, she didn't feel the need to be alone in that. So, what's next for you? Jason asked softly, his voice low but filled with warmth. Emily took a deep breath. The past had been a constant fight, a constant proving of herself. But now, she felt a shift. She wasn't just building an empire. She was building a future. A future where she could stop fighting and start living. A future where she wasn't alone in her battles. I don't know yet, she admitted, a small smile tugging at her lips. But maybe, I don't have to figure it out alone. Jason's smile deepened, and Emily felt something stir within her. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. Not just in business, but in life. As the days passed, Blake's world continued to unravel. His business struggled, his debts mounted, and Savannah, ever the opportunist, had already started looking elsewhere. The illusion of his success began to crack, and the whispers from his colleagues grew louder. He had once believed that he was the one in control. But now, the very company he had mocked and discarded was about to be his undoing. But Emily had already moved on. She had learned the hard way that the best way to respond to those who had wronged her was to thrive. To rise above the expectations and limitations others had set for her. She had done it, and in doing so, she had reclaimed more than just her company, she had reclaimed herself. The past was behind her. The future was all that mattered now. And with that, Emily took her next step forward. No longer looking back. As Emily stood at the edge of her journey, she realized that the road ahead was not just about building her empire or claiming back what was once stolen from her. It was about living on her own terms, without the weight of the past hanging over her. The struggle, the heartbreak, the betrayal, it had all shaped her into the woman she had become. But now, she was free, free from the need to prove herself, free from the chains of her past. She had won not just in business, but in life. With Jason by her side, Emily knew that her next chapter was not just about success, it was about finding balance, love, and peace. As they walked together into the future, she couldn't help but smile at how far she had come. She had faced the worst, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more powerful than ever. Blake, on the other hand, had learned the hard way that arrogance and greed only lead to destruction. He had lost everything, his pride, his business, and the love he had once taken for granted. As he watched Emily move forward, he could only sit in the wreckage of his own choices. A silent reminder that true power wasn't about status or wealth, it was about integrity and perseverance. The lesson was clear: success is the best revenge. But true victory lies in rising above those who doubt you. Emily had proved that, and now, as she turned her gaze toward the future, she knew that this was just the beginning. Thank you for following along with Emily's story. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another Life Stories video. Your journey of growth, empowerment, and inspiration awaits. Stay tuned.